Lesson 11, the subject today is Asana. Lots has been said about that already, but today it's formal. The subject on the schedule is Asana. Let's go through it. Asana, of course, you already know, means literally standing still posture. So any kind of yoga where there's movement technically isn't really yoga, because the secret of standing still while actively engaging, which are two opposing polarities, leads to sattva. And that's what yoga is about. It's about sattva. There is no transformation without sattva. So exercise is always good. If you enjoy, if you like dynamic yoga classes, enjoy them. But if you're looking for real growth, real development, real spirituality, then you need sattva. And that is, the ancient yogis developed this system specifically for that. Actually, interestingly, the younger generation don't know this, but until yoga became commercially until yoga was popularized to make it commercially attractive, modern yoga didn't exist. All the fancy flow yogas didn't exist, except for one, and that is Ashtanga yoga. All the others look like Ashtanga yoga, they just have another name. Now the story about Ashtanga yoga is that it was developed by Pattabhi Jois somewhere in the early 20th century, so 1910s, early on. And his justification for developing a dynamic form of yoga was, young people need to move. You cannot put young people on a cushion and tell them to shut up and be quiet and stop moving. So it was kind of an intermediate stage for young people to get into yoga, starting with movement, developing a strong and healthy body, and then when getting older, more and more moving towards the traditional form. So asana, standing still, but not relaxing in the pose. There are, in modern studios, there are classes that resemble traditional yoga, that resemble proper asana, and they're usually called hatha yoga, yin yoga, and healing yoga. They approach it relatively in the way it was intended. They do play music, which is distracting, but apart from that, it comes pretty close to proper asana, except for the fact that the teachers all the time say, when you are in a pose, relax. And that is not correct. Because the moment you relax in the pose, one of the two polarities weakens and there is no harmony. So the secret of asana really is standing still, no movement, but actively engaging. Erecting. From the heels to the top of the head. All the muscles, not strongly engaged, but moderately engaged, gently engaged. So that about the word asana, the meaning of the word asana. Many yoga teachers don't know exactly what it means, but this is what it means, and it has a very deep meaning, a purpose. There is a reason why it is done like that. It also explains why in the past, before the popularization of yoga, yoga was not for everyone. Was not for everyone. No, was not for everybody. Because many people think yoga is boring because of this. And that is why modern yoga class, they always play music. And the teacher is trained in physical anatomy, and that's what they constantly tell you about. They constantly talk about muscles, about the joints, about how the body functions, and what physical benefits the postures, each of the postures have, because they think that that is what they have to do, because that is how they are trained to teach. So, and you can see that almost all teach in the same way. Not only that, they use the same kind of tone of voice in which they teach. And that's a bit in contradiction with what yoga intends. The whole purpose of yoga is to bring out your individuality, not to make a robot out of you. But that's what they do in modern yoga courses. Anyway. You notice that I always write down the names of the asanas. That has a purpose also. You don't have to memorize them. Don't get me wrong. If you want to know the name of the exercise, you can grab your book or the schedule and look it up. So not important. You don't have to memorize it. But this is about mindfulness, creating mindfulness. That means that you start doing things with your whole being, body, mind, and soul, but with your whole being. We live in a time that multitasking has become a thing. And people who multitask, they are proud of their ability to multitask. However, research shows that people who multitask are not good at any of the tasks that they perform. The outcome, the result of each of the tasks that they perform while multitasking is mediocre. And the reason for that is we are not designed to do this. When we start focusing on one thing at a time, we become very efficient. We connect with the essence of whatever it is that we focus on. And as a result, the outcome of what we do is always excellent. It's good. And that is what you, with the practice of asana, the approach to how asana is intended to be done is naturally creating mindfulness. And when you learn that in your asana, it will very naturally integrate into your daily life, because you start outside of your yoga mat, you start doing other things in life, just one at a time. Like when you're washing dishes, you will see that your dishes become cleaner than they ever were before. Whatever it is that you do at work also, you will stand out in the quality of your work, because it gets better and better as a result of this new quality of mindfulness. Focus on one thing deeply and perform the task to the fullest. What happens is that when you focus on one thing at a time, from mental engagement, it becomes an intuitive engagement. And when you engage intuitively, it becomes almost perfect. You can compare this with driving a car. Everybody drove a car? Everybody knows how to drive a car? So you remember the first time ever that you got into a car. It was very scary. And if you drove with an instructor the very first time, they probably took you to some remote place, abandoned parking lot or something, with no lamp post and trees standing in the way. And they let you drive there first. Because the first time that you drive a car, it is a mental affair. And you cannot control all the tasks that you need to perform with your feet and your hands, and at the same time with your eyes on the road and in the mirrors. You can't control that mentally. So in the beginning you're all over the place, and in the meantime, if there are trees, you almost bump into a tree or another car. But if you keep practicing driving, you notice that you don't even pay attention anymore to what your hands and feet are doing, which indicates that intuition has taken over. It becomes a feeling. It's not a thought anymore. And as a result, you relax. And your hands and your feet and your eyes, in front and in the back through the mirrors, have everything under control. that is when the intuition has taken over. And this is what happens when you practice mindfulness. You become an expert at whatever it is that you choose to do. That you set your, I would almost say set your mind upon, because that is the expression, but that you set your heart upon. The name of the exercise is in fact a mantra. It's a vibration. So deliberately, I not only write it down, but I pronounce the name of the exercise. And the first time, it's all new. It doesn't have a meaning. I explain the exercise, how it's done. We do it together. Next week, we do it again. And now it starts to integrate. The moment that I vibrate the mantra, the dots connect inside your whole being. You can feel the exercise. It's not a thought anymore. You can feel the exercise. So the first step, if you do it step by step, of course, normally it's a fluid process. But step by step, you start with the mantra, the name of the exercise. And I pronounce it, but you can say it in silence. You see it on the board. You pronounce it in silence. The next step, because you're already familiar with the pose after the first time, is that you visualize the pose. It's like neuro-linguistic programming almost. You visualize the pose, and then you go to work. So first you have the vibration that makes all the connections. That already prepares your body for what you're not doing yet, but your body's getting ready. Then you visualize it, and then you go. And it becomes intuition. And the reason why we don't play music is because we want to be completely engaged with what we do. That is how you integrate body, mind, and soul. That is how you start doing things intuitively. And mindfulness also is not possible if you're distracted by a teacher talking about technical details and music playing in the background. So it's boring for people who don't understand it, but it is heaven for people who have deeply experienced it. It's the reason why I fell in love with yoga. I could just close my eyes and feel. And it was, for the first time in my life, I think that I actually really started to feel myself. And it has led to total change of my life. It has allowed me to take control of my life as a teenager. From a very dark hole to hope and looking for the future. So huge implications. They may not be as dramatic for everybody who does yoga, but that is the reason why I fell in love with yoga, but it's also the reason why I stick to the traditional way of teaching yoga. Now, if you go a little bit down the first page, you see something about staying away 1 arrow shot distance away from water. This is from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. There is a sutra. We will read this sutra soon. When we after the introduction of Kriya Yoga next week, which is chapter 2, we will then read chapter 1 of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. There is a sutra in that chapter 1 that says, stay away from earth, water, and fire. Or rocks, which is earth, water, and fire. Now, Ajita in the past explained it in this way. Your body exists out of water for 62%, I think. I think the editor of the file researched it. I thought it was more than that. But for a large part, we exist out of water. So when you're very close to water, it affects your water, the harmony in your water center. And I've also heard people say, when you're done with your yoga class, you have to wait for half an hour before you take a shower. And the answer upon the question as to why you should wait for half an hour is, they say, because the spirit leaves the body. Now, what can you make of that? Not much, right? It's something that they heard somewhere or they read somewhere, but they don't know what's behind the meaning of the spirit leaving the body. This is what happens. If you practice yoga correctly, you're in a very refined state when you're done. So if immediately you jump into the shower, you crash. That wonderful condition is immediately demolished by the shock. The best way to end your yoga session is to quietly go about the next stage of what you're going to do. Just quietly change your clothes if you need to. Just quietly go to the bathroom if you need to relieve yourself. Just very slow, quietly, so that delicate condition that you created, the sattva that you created, is not suddenly and violently demolished. Makes sense. So stay away, an arrow shot away from rocks. Ajita explained, you need to practice in a room that is big enough because a small room is oppressing. It's true. Korean people would say tap tap he if you're in a small confined space. So practicing yoga is not really very beneficial in such a condition. And staying away from water, fire is explained as, excessive heat is not healthy. People enjoy heat. Korea is famous for the floor heating, and there are people who really indulge in that. It does weaken. You have a fire center, the Manipura chakra, which provides your body with energy and heat. If you provide your body with external heat, Manipura chakra will get weaker, and that's absolutely true. I've seen people suffering from that condition. And it leads to severe depression, hunched body in the long term, really sad, devastating. But you know what? After all those years of teaching yoga and contemplating what I teach every time, I came to a different conclusion. And it doesn't invalidate what I just explained about earth, water, and fire, but there is a more sophisticated explanation behind it. Because to thrive in your yoga endeavors, you need to eliminate all possible distractions. And you know what the biggest distractions are? Huh? Yeah. But emotions and desires are the biggest distractions. And where do you find them? In the lowest chakras. Muladhara is earth element. Svadhisthana is water element. Manipura chakra is the fire element. So when the Hatha Yoga Pradipika says that you should eliminate earth, water, and fire, or stay away from earth, water, and fire, it means several things. You need to provide all basic needs. Otherwise, your instincts will kick in and distract you, make you restless. So you need to be provided with sources of food and fresh water. Safety is important, Muladhara chakra. Safety, security, stability. The three lower chakras are all related to emotions, desires, and ambition. Manipura chakra is the one that drives everything. So if there is restlessness in the chakras below caused by anxiety, life being threatened, insecurity, lack of food and fresh water, or safety, it's Manipura chakra that starts to burn and prompts you to take action to improve the situation. You cannot practice yoga in such condition, and that is what it means. And the situation created for that in ancient times was to build a community exclusive for the practice of yoga. Either a temple or a community in the forest or the mountain. And in the Western world, they built monasteries for monks to spend their lives practicing and studying. So complete stability, They grow their own foods. It's built next to a water source, a river that provides clean water, etc. Stay away from earth, water, and fire. That's what this means. Make sure that the lower 3 chakras are not aroused, because it leads to disruption of your sattva. And this also explains why monasteries are almost always divided into male and female. And it also explains why traditionally schools also divided girls and boys. And there in Korea, there's still school. When I came to Korea 27 years ago, most schools were divided, separated. That changed over time, but this explains why they separated. They wanted to not have young people tempted by erotic feelings, by putting them together in a class. It does lead to distraction when young people fall in love, and it reduces the results of their study. Of course, it's not healthy for the development, so they did correct that. But when my mom grew up in the 1930s, in the Netherlands also, still there were schools only for boys and only for girls. And that was gradually eliminated, and Korea just started the process of eliminating those separate schools later on. But it has all to do with creating the proper circumstances for growth and development. Now, something obvious is that when you eat before you practice yoga, you create a conflict. And one of those is physical, and the other is related to energy. When you eat, the digestive system kicks in to process the food using energy. Energy that you then not have available for your yoga practice. So it is better to practice yoga on a relatively empty stomach, so that you have all that energy at that moment available for your practice. But another thing is very practical. If you just had a meal and your belly is full, and then you have to bend left and right and over and or do a shoulder stand or a headstand, that food is really seriously in the way. And with bending, it can actually hurt in your abdominal area when you bend with a full stomach. So that's just practically just doesn't make sense to have a meal before you start with your yoga. If you're very hungry though, practically, if you're very hungry, have a small bite of something, like half a kimbap or just half a sandwich or so, something that at least will still the hunger, but doesn't really fill up the stomach so in such a way that it's in the way and absorbs or uses a lot of energy to digest it. Now, interestingly, you will read also in the 3rd paragraph that excessively rigid discipline also makes yoga fail. And this brings us to the subject of discipline. We will talk about it again in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. But without discipline, nothing can be achieved, right? But if discipline is rigid, it starts to work against you. For example, you discover yoga and you think, wow, this is so nice and so good. I'm going to do it every day. You vow to do it every day. And you wake up every morning 6 o'clock, alarm clock, 6 o'clock. You jump out of bed, take a cold shower, and do yoga for an hour. And you do that every day because you decided to do that. That's a little bit extreme, but that is what rigid discipline is, right? What happens if you approach it in this way? Anything, not only yoga, you start to hate it. Within a couple of weeks, 6 o'clock, the alarm clock goes off, and you will want to smash it with a hammer or throw it out the window. Oh my God, no, not again. You will start to hate it. So what's the answer to this? How do you deal with this? Because without discipline, you don't get anywhere. That is, allow yourself at least some flexibility. If it is meant to be, you will develop a natural kind of discipline. Not because somebody tells you that you have to, or because you vow to do it every morning, but because you feel that it's good for you. How does this work? You say, I'm going to try to practice every day. And then you do that. But then comes a morning that you don't really feel like it. And when that happens, you allow yourself to be lazy for once. You know what happens then? You can rest a little bit more. You can watch TV. If you do it early in the morning, you can sleep a little bit more. If you do it in the evening, you can do something else leisurely, read a book or watch TV or something. But next, you feel that something is missing. Because you've been practicing before, it makes you feel different. Generally, people feel good when they practice yoga regularly. And now there is this day that you give in to your laziness. Allow yourself to do that, but do it consciously. Because in yoga we do everything consciously. And you notice that you don't feel the same. This in itself will be your motivation to decide, tomorrow I will do it again. So discipline is important. Rigid discipline, however, works against you. And this applies to us, ourselves, but it also applies to if we force discipline upon people. If you look at Korean students, I don't know about Japan or China or the Netherlands, but if you look at Korean students, suicide rates are pretty high. Why? Because there are many students who hate school. Because they are forced to not only go to the regular school, but also sometimes before, early in the morning, or after school, in the afternoon and evening, sometimes until late at night, they have to go to other schools, hagwons, to specialize in certain subjects. And on the surface, that seems to be good for your development, but if you start hating what is supposed to be good for you, it starts to work against you. And children, most children don't have discipline on their own. So parents need to have a balanced way of demanding discipline, but to a reasonable level. Because when your child starts to hate what is supposed to be good for them, it's not good for them anymore. And suicide is extreme. There are other ways, drug abuse or other behaviors that are harmful, resulting from rigid discipline imposed upon kids, teenagers. All right. Questions about asana? We will come back to it a little bit more when we read the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Let's have a short break.